for me when I'm looking at some of the kinds of research that I want to do. So we submitted a paper to the journal and we got this review back, and it says that there is a recent MISQ publication that is highly related to the topic of this paper, but it's not cited. It's important to compare your research in the MISQ paper and discuss how your research provides additional insights. Now, MISQ is the #1 journal in information systems. And if somebody is telling you that there is a paper in that journal which you are supposed to cite and that you failed to cite, that is a big problem. In fact, one of the things that I want to touch on is ethics. So I don't know who the reviewer is, and the reviewer is not saying this is my paper. He's not telling us who that person is. So the question is, it's possible that this is the person who wrote the paper, or this person was the one who wrote the paper. But because of ethics, the person cannot say that. But now he's saying, or she or he is saying, you are missing an important paper. So when the review came to us, I think our first job is to find that paper. So that's why I was looking for this particular sentence. So if you go forward, then he provides the reference. So the issue is, how do you move forward? So I look, I'm going to show you. Okay. Okay. How do I get the mouse is not working. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think it's easy. I want to close it. Okay. Yeah, close it. I can talk. I think I can go ahead and talk. So what we did is that I found the paper and I read. So I wanted to show you the process that I passed through. So, and I have a hard copy, so I can also share the hard copy. So I went through the paper and I identified another paper that they cited. And the other paper that they cited was what I really wanted, not this paper. So if you are a scholar, the ability to see some of these things is what I wanted to show. So when he's able to get the folder, I would like to show you how I went through the paper and how I was able to identify a paper that I needed. And the reason is because when I saw the paper that was referenced to us, I noticed some differences between our work and their work. But the difference was very minute. And so when they ask you to go and find the differences, I couldn't just use that argument to show the difference. So in my mind, I wanted to know what is the basis for the difference. So I had to find the next paper that I really needed. So when I found the paper, and maybe the best thing is for me to show you what I did. Okay. So I'm going to pass this paper around and you will see all the highlights. So what I did was I found out that they have a framework, and that the framework will show you when you can talk about an antecedent if you want to improve theory, or when you do mediation, when do you do moderation. So a lot of time people will say, but I was looking at somebody's paper yesterday and I saw the title. The title has a sentence, a column, and then the moderation. And then I said, when you look at a paper like this, you are telling me that people have already studied an independent variable and a dependent variable, and you want to look at the moderation. He said, no, I'm just looking at all of them together. I said, that's not what the title is saying. Right. So having looked at the paper, I noticed that the MISQ paper did moderation, and we were looking at antecedent. So that was a breakthrough for us. And the reason is, if they had done an antecedent, then they're going to say, you are not making any contribution. And the reason why they will say that we are not making a contribution is that the first paper was published in a very, very top journal. So they're going to say, what else can you do if this work has been done already? And yesterday, Professor Kwa mentioned that if you just say that I'm doing something in Ghana, Ghana and China have some similarities, even though you might say it's Africa. So from a cultural perspective, they might say you are not doing any great work. So the only reason why our contribution was accepted was because they were doing moderation and we were doing antecedent. So let me see. So let me see. I can do the. Okay. So what I have just discussed is the motivation. What is the motivation for this presentation? Okay. It's not a paper. This is not. Yeah, it's not it. Oh, wow. Yeah. So this is what I want to show you. So they came out with this framework, and as you can see in the framework, you can see, I think I can't see from here, so I have to look here. You have a contextual theory development, and then they show you that you can identify your general theory, and based upon that, you can then look at level 1, level 2, or the cross-content type of theory development. So basically, you have to make sure that you understand exactly what you want to do, what are the benefits of what you want to do. But what I notice is that sometimes we just come around and said, I want to do a moderation, and you don't have the justification. And so as you can see, level 1 says contextualize establishing theories by adding or removing a core construct. So you may have a theory such as technology acceptance model, and then you might say, I have an interest, but I don't really need all the construct, and then you can remove some construct from it. Level 2 is where you have the antecedent level 2A. 2B is where you have the moderation, and then 2C is where you decompose the core constructs into contextual factors. So I'm going to show you excuse me, when you can do something like that. So I just use information system as an example, but this model can be used in other management disciplines. So I don't know how many of you know what the term is. Can anybody tell us what? Yeah.
Okay, so it's in line with reason, action, or plan theory of planned behavior. I try to look at people intention towards accepting a new technology, right? So it tries to say that people attitude towards new technology emerges from one, the norm, right? Social norm. It could be perceived value, perceived ease of use, and other factors actually are the sources of their intention to accept that new technology.
Very good. So basically, ease of use and perceived ease of use will influence attitude, and then attitude will influence intention. So the people that came up with the theory are Venkatesh and his advisor, and then at some point they wanted to study another context, and they noticed that attitude was not important, so they remove attitude that serves as a mediation, and then they look at just the ease of use and perceived ease of use, how that influence attitude. So that would be an example of level 1. Another important thing, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to present this, is that when we talk about, say, Ghana, or you talk about new context, most of the information system are things that they force individual to use, especially in the organizational environment. So what it means is that their focus is on efficiency and effectiveness. But if, let's say, someone is using mobile applications, sometimes, or maybe they are talking about video games, then the focus changes into some sort of an enjoyment. And that enjoyment will not involve some sort of use. So in that case, you can replace your usefulness with some sort of an enjoyment. So if you take this theory and you want to go into a new context, then you can define new construct to replace what was in the original model. Okay, so in that 2A, and 2A is especially where our research was interested in looking at. And what we wanted to do was, we wanted to look at protection motivation theory. Protection motivation theory talks about how people behave in the security environment based upon some benefit and some sort of risk. And so we wanted to see how culture will influence that. So that means we wanted to use culture as an antecedent. But I think this is one one of the things that is very, very important, is that I hear most scholars talk about moderation. Most scholars talk about moderation and mediation. And to me, I look at this paper and I was really excited, because it specifically tells you when to do that. See, if you look at it, it helps explain inconsistent effects of the factor and improve the explanatory power. So my question to you is, why is it so? If you look at the purpose or benefit, it said it helps explain inconsistent effects of the factors across studies and improve the explanatory power of general models when they are applied to specific context. What do you think this means?
Okay, so I would like to try. Let's take, for instance, if I ask a question like, does income affect happiness? Now, I could have a theory that may be explaining the link between income and happiness. Now, someone can test that particular link in a given context, but may have the effect, the link to be positive. Some may test it with a different sample and may have the result to be negative or even zero. And the question is, why do we have these inconsistencies in the result? So it means the theory that I propose explaining the link between X and Y may have boundaries to the extent that within given certain conditions, that theory may not fit well. So to have a better explanation, we need to consider the differences in contextual variables. So I think that is what it's trying to say.
That is exactly the perfect reason. And so what I'm trying to say is that if, let's say, I have a theory, and I'm sure most of us here will be dealing with something like that, and I want to apply it in another environment, then at the minimum, these are two choices that I have. One is, can I model the theory as an antecedent, or can I model it as a moderation? Sometimes you can have antecedent and moderation at the same time. You can have antecedent, moderation, and mediation. So I think one of the questions that we have when Jim was here was, you want the professors to help you to develop hypotheses. And I heard him saying that it is not just boxes and arrow. And I think that is what he means by it's not boxes and arrow. So you cannot just stand up and say, I am interested in how, like you said, maybe income influences prosperity, and just put the boxes there and just go and collect the data. So these kinds of understanding will help you to have some sort of a framework, so that when you are looking at an issue, this morning we talked a lot about different issues when we watch the movie. So when you leave this room and you decide, or you start looking into topics that you can deal with, this will be very useful. So what you are saying is that I look at the literature, and sometimes scholars find this relationship to be positive, and sometimes they find it to be negative. And so I want to make a contribution, and you are coming in, then automatically you see that you have found some inconsistencies with the same theory. So that gives you that this is a situation where moderation will be useful. And so that's why when I saw this paper, I was really excited about it, because I didn't really know that that is the criteria for thinking of it. Because in general, people might say, okay, let me do the relationship between any dependent variable and dependent variable. And then sometimes they will say, in addition, I will also do mediation. And then in addition, I will also do moderation. So what is going to happen is that when you write paper like that, it's likely to be rejected, because you are only trying to do something, but you don't really have the understanding, you don't really have the background. So yesterday, we spent the whole day talking about your introduction. So you see how, if I was to write an introduction, then I'm going to say, this is a topic that is of interest, and different scholars have looked at it, and some are finding results like this, they are finding results like that. So there are inconsistencies, and the reason why there are inconsistencies is they are applying the underlying model. So I want to introduce some sort of a context and some sort of moderation. So you see that your logic then becomes stronger to convince the review team that you want to do something that is interesting. So that's why I was thinking that this will be something that I can share. Now, 2C, decompose core constructs into contextual factors. I'm going to use a work that a PhD student here at KNUST is working on, and I'm part of the work. And I know Professor Paul would agree that institutional theory is one of the theories that have been used, not just in management, but in other business disciplines, information system, supply chain. And the student was interested in green supply chain. So there is, I don't know if there is something that we have talked about here, is your dependent variable. And anytime you are doing research, I have seen papers, especially in information system, where they say that the dependent variable, which means your dependent variable is the most important thing when you start to think about research. It could be that your focus is to see how an independent variable influences the dependent variable. Yet, if the dependent variable is not interesting to your audience, then the work is useless. So your dependent variable is the most important thing. So in this case, the dependent variable was green supply chain practices. Are businesses in Ghana interested in green supply chain practices? So even at lunchtime, because we watched the movie, when we watched the movie this morning, in my mind, what they are saying is anything that you see, anything that you do, turn it into research. So when we were having lunch, I look at the package, and you see that anytime people are together, you see how they package the food. All this packaging, right? What do you do after you are done? You throw them into trash. You can actually recycle it. Recycling is a form of green supply chain or green supply. So if we sit here as professors or scholars and we behave like we don't care about green, that means that that's a problem. So when he says he was interested in green supply chain practices, that's the dependent variable. This is a relevant topic, very relevant in Ghana. So the question was, what do you want to study? So we want to study the forces that causes organization to become interested in green supply chain. So then I said, what is your theory? So think about the process. So the first thing is, what is your dependent variable? What do you want to know? So now I have the independent variable is, you want to know the forces that will influence the green supply chain practices. So the next question will be, what will be your theory? So in this case, the theory was institutional theory. Institutional theory has been studied, and typically it has three main components, right? Coercive, mimetic, and what else? Or what do we call them? Coercive, mimetic, and normative. Three. And it has been studied for so long. So I told him, I said, think deep. Are these the only three dimensions of institutional theory that you can look at in Ghana? And then he says, yes. And I said, what about the chiefs? Because and that's the reason why I wanted to show this particular issue here. So for instance, one time, I don't know whether it's last year, when I came to Ghana, we were driving and we had to go to one of the mining companies, and as we were driving and we got to some place, and I could see that the Chinese guys have destroyed a whole lot of places, and the road was so small, and there was a huge car that went, and I don't know, we just got into a series, and before we got to the series, you can see that if the two cars had met, there was no way. The car was so huge. What does that tell me? It tells me that, and I understand that the chiefs have an influence in how people treat the environment. So if the chiefs have an influence in how people treat the environment, then it means that the chiefs can actually influence green supply chain practices. So you see that there is an additional dimension of institutional theory in this context, which is what he called custodial force, or a chieftaincy type of thing. So now, then I told him to look into it and see whether that particular force is different from the three different things, and then we found out that it was true. So as a professor, see, to me, that was his major contribution. Because if you go through a PhD program or DBA program, they will ask you to do instrument development. You have to develop instrument. And so you can see that you are expanding the construct, the institutional theory construct. And the interesting thing is that if, let's say, this paper gets accepted in a very good journal, that would be a huge thing. Let me go further. The point is this: Ghana is not the only place where we have royal people, right? So we have the Asantehene, we have the Ochehene and all those things. But if you go to Europe, they also have the Queen. But they see, what is the difference between Ghana and Britain? Because once again, if you are going to build your theory, you have to build your argument. So how is Ghana different from Britain? Monarchies. What else? The Queen is the government. But here, the king is not the government. So the Asantehene is not part of the government, but he has power. So that's why you see that when you are making the argument and say, yeah, this is similar to the monarchy, but it's different because the Queen is the government, whereas here it's not the government. So for instance, going back to the movie that we watched today, 4 days ago, I saw the Asantehene on Ghana Web. I saw the Asantehene, the Ochehene, and the president of Ghana. And the 4 of them were playing golf or something, and Ochehene was asking the government to involve the chief. So I called him. I said, look at what is going on. That's what I'm trying to say. So you see how in that environment, his or your ability to be able to identify the theory and see how you can expand it is what's going to make a difference. And that is the level 2C. So you decompose the core construct into contextual factors. So if you are looking into research topic, to me personally, what is going to make your research interesting in Ghana are some of these things. The ability to look at a construct. Let me give you another example. I was talking to Professor Akwa, and we were talking about social capital. And social capital has 3 dimensions as well. And right now, most of the social capital is being developed in the social media environment, in online community and stuff. Now, that changes the whole dynamics of what social capital is. And what is even exciting is that if you look into maybe a survey instrument and you see how they collect data on social capital, and you were to go into the social media, it's completely different. And that's exactly what we are saying. So as you start thinking about your thesis, your dissertation, you have to think in those kinds of environment. Say, if there is a theory, how can I expand on the theory? What are some of the things that I can do? And I believe that this particular paper will be very useful to give you ideas about how you can do your contextualization. So now I'm showing some examples. So that's what we said before. You said that perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use was influencing attitude. But see, in this model, attitude had been removed. The interesting thing, though, is that you have to prove that there is a direct relationship, because the original theory had to argue that there is a mediation. So you have to provide justification. Now, this is very interesting. So you see how the dependent variable is the same, but here you are changing those performance-specific variables and the effort-specific variables, and because you are going into a specific technology, right? So let me give you an example. So sometimes you look at mobile money. It's just a technology, but there are so many things that goes on with mobile money that makes it different from other things. Now they talk about the port. Ghana is changing the port. There's cashless, and there is all those kinds of things. As you hear those things, can you think about how the technology is different and how you can change? Here they are talking about intention to use digital library. So the digital library gives you a new context. And because of the new context, here you see how they have terminology, screen layout, and all these things are things that relate to that particular context. And it allows you to make a contribution in that environment. Now, okay, let me go back. Once again, here also you see, not only are we changing the construct, but we are also looking at how this moderate the relationship. Now, when I'm sure most of you understand what moderation is, but you are saying that even though performance and effort influence intention, the individual factor will change as to whether it will be higher or lower, right? So, and then the next one
Hello.
here.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Please, I need a clarification on the previous diagram. I think from the earlier presentation, we tried to look at, you discussed the basis for introducing a moderator, but assuming you are proposing a new framework, like you started with the perceived ease of use and perceived usefulness linking to intention, and now in the second diagram, you have the moderator there. Now, my worry is, if it is a new thing you are doing, and then we don't have prior studies stating it, and they don't have inconsistent result. We don't have inconsistent result in the literature. Is it advisable to introduce a moderator?
Yes, because see, that's what I don't know. One of the things that I know about information system is that information system fail. They actually don't like when you use two theories in one paper, right? So sometimes in certain discipline, it's okay to apply two theory to support your hypothesis. So, but information system in particular, if let's say you have even 10 hypotheses, they want you to use only one theory to support that. So when you talk about theorizing, the idea is if you think that there is a mediation or you think that there is a moderation, then the theory to support justification. So if the theory doesn't support that justification, then you are in trouble. And so one of the, how do I say it? So you have to look to the theory and expand the theory to be able to address those moderation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So
yeah, let me also make a point here. I think one of the issues with your question, and in terms of moderation, you may have studies that have consistently supported the idea that, for example, the performance effects and the efforts always influences the intentions to use the digital library. But those studies are being conducted in specific contextual environments. Now, you can move to a completely different environment, and then you can say, it is true that the intention to use the digital library, these are the antecedents. But in this particular environment, because of some factors, you may want to look at some other factors that may moderate that relationship, that will show that, yes, you will get it, but if, for example, the individual factor is added to it, it may enhance the impact, or it may reduce the impact. And so you don't always want to look at only that direct relationship, but we also want to bring in an intervening variable. And so, yes, there are, most of the time people will say, if there are inconsistent results, then you are thinking about something is happening somewhere. That is why you are seeing these inconsistent results. There can also be consistent results, but those results may be coming from different environments. And because of the way you look at things, you may start looking at an environment and the characteristics of the environment, and that may inform you that the direct relationship is not as simple as you see it, and that there may be other things that may also either enhance or suppress that relationship.
And also to add what he said, even for the same paper that I showed you, one of the problems they have is that they will say some of your arguments are weak. So, for instance, here you are saying that computer self-efficacy is introduced and it's not in the original model. So, what you do, this time we are not talking about how to theorize or how to write your hypothesis, but in the hypothesis definition writing, you have to show that there has been studies that have looked at some sort of construct that relates to this, maybe from a different context. So, like he said, here we are looking at digital library, but maybe there is something about intention to do something. And that intention, we found that computer self-efficacy influences that. So that would be something that you use as a support. But you cannot just write it and say, see, what I'm trying to say is that you cannot just write that I'm just putting this thing here. You have to have a justification for it. So here it's a little bit more complex, because now we are putting the perceived usefulness and all those things there, and then we have all these as antecedent, right? So one of the things that I would do is that, and that's why I wanted to pass the paper around for a particular reason, and that's why at the beginning I asked them to scan it so I could show it to you. And the reason I'm saying this is that know that it's difficult to publish in Ghana. I know that maybe some of you may think that those of us that are outside Ghana, we have more, let's say, opportunities than you. But I will tell you this, that when I was a PhD student, sometimes I could spend about 20 hours just to read one paper. So sometimes, I remember when we started the PhD, one student would come and said, I don't understand what the professor is asking. And then somebody said, how many hours have you spent? One person said, I spent 30 hours. And still I don't understand. Another person will say, I spent 35 hours. One paper like that. And my advisor, for instance, he will come in. He used to live in Maryland. He will come in on the morning. He will come in the afternoon, 12 o'clock. And the assignment that he gave to us, we have spent almost 30 hours. And we don't really understand it well. And he will say, go and print the paper for me. I print the paper for him, and he will read it, and he will come to the seminar, and we say, how can he read something for 30 minutes and he gets everything? And so I wanted to show you, but the point is, if you look at the highlights, you have to spend time to study, to learn, and then you can become perfect. So it's not like one day show. You have to learn, and as you learn, like I said, I saw a sentence in the paper, and that sentence told me that, hey, you need to go and find those two papers. And I found those two papers, and that's when I found that this is the paper that they used. So all these things become very, very important as you move forward. So this one here, we are looking at all these antecedents and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go forward. And I'm not going to spend time to read this, because I will make the PowerPoints available. Most of the things here are the ones that are summarized over there. So what I want to show you are two things, is that this is what we did. So the original model is all these things here, right? So you can see how research is all about. And the journal that we have submitted the paper to is a very, very high quality journal, one of the top 10 journals. So you have to be careful. So this is what has been done. All these things here on the right has been done. And all we are doing is this part. Now, for those of you who know something about the Hofstad's culture, there are 4 of them. Actually, if you add the one from China, then there are 5. But we noticed that those 2 things, they didn't work. So we removed them. And then we have these 2, right? And so one of the questions is, how do you justify that this can be here? And that alone is also a lot of work, just to justify. So you cannot just put anything there like that, right? Now, let me tell you something that is exciting. See, we have left it only 2. Then one of the reviewers who has power, because see, when you get the review, you can see the one that has power. He or she is actually recommending that we should remove 1 and keep only 1. So initially we were thinking maybe it's a good idea, then some of us said no, maybe it's not a good idea, let's keep it. But see, the problem is, now that we have kept the 2, we have to make sure that our hypotheses are strong, because he already advised us to remove 1, and we said no, we are not removing it. So it means we need to do a good job, but our main contribution is just those 2 things here, right? Now, in the hypothesis, they told us that all the long for this relationship, we should remove them. And all we have to do is to just state them, like, because this is already known, and rather spend maybe 10 pages just to argue for those 2. So that's what we did. Now, another interesting thing that I wanted to share is something that they call leverage. I don't know whether the accounting people can explain. What does it mean to say you have a leverage? Maybe not accounting, but What does it mean to have a leverage? That's one thing that I want to encourage everybody here to think about leverage. In my mind, the way I see leverage is that if, let's say, I spend considerable amount of time, let's say I spend 2 months to study institutional theory, then it's not going to be beneficial if you publish only one paper on institutional theory. So to leverage means that now I can take the knowledge that I have in institutional theory to do another research. So, and I think it's part of the topics that we're supposed to discuss. How do you form an international collaboration and things like that? So, sometimes when people see that you have done some work, they can actually invite you into their project. Or if you see that people are doing something that you have knowledge, and the reason is because if you spend, let's say, 40 hours on the previous work, here you may spend only 2 hours. Because everything that you're going to say, you already know. You don't have to go and study again. Right? So I want to show you an example where I applied that. So I spent a lot of hours to read those papers. There were about 4 papers to work on this project. I serve on the editorial board for Information Technology for Development. It's not an A journal, it's a B journal. But I serve on the editorial, and most of the time, even though I'm just on the editorial board, I serve as an associate editor for the lady. And so, and most of the time when she says, do something for me, I will say yes. So she said, why don't you and one of my advisors, I had 2 PhD advisors, work on the editorial for some papers that I'm going to send to you. I said, I will do it. So she sent me about 10 papers, and she said, write editorial on it. Right? And I had the book here. I don't know whether maybe I'll pass it around. Because I just want to show you how you can benefit from what you have done. So what I did was I read the papers a little bit, and they don't have anything in common. And so I didn't know how I'm going to write about it. So it took me like a week, and I called the professor. He's in Canada, and he didn't have time. So I was struggling with it. The lady came back and said, hey, when are you going to finish? I said, I'll finish it in a month. I didn't know what to do. 2 weeks gone, 3 weeks gone. And then it just to me that you just did some work on context-specific theorizing. So, listen, research, sometimes you can write a research in your mind. And then when you sit down, you just write what you already built in your mind. So what came into my mind is, if I can identify context, right, then I can go back and look at the papers and see which contexts were used. And that will be my editorial. And so I just thought that was good. So for instance, if you look at the paper that I pass around first, they talk about information system would typically look at 3 contexts. One is the user, one the use, and one is the technology itself. So typically anytime you see an information system paper, they have who is the user, what are they using, and what technology are you talking about. So this particular, when you talk about IT for development, but the journal's focus is on IT to help in development. So I said, if it's the development, then you are talking about cultural issue. You are talking about socio-political issue. So I kind of felt that those are the context that you can study the different issues. So all I did was I started identifying publications that have looked at culture, IT user, IT usage, and geopolitical regions, socio-political issues, and socio-political issues. Yesterday I mentioned it that there is a paper that is not published by an African, but it's published by somebody from outside Africa, and it's published in MISQ. And you can see, this is the paper here. They talk about corruption in political institution, corruption in legal institution, corruption in media institution, and this paper was published in a very top journal. And the whole data was 1 page on the internet. They took the data from the internet and they wrote very powerful paper like that. And today I heard people saying we can't get the data. It's just because sometimes we don't know the topic, right? So all these papers, I found out, I noticed that they are part of development. So I selected them. And so I think I have two, yeah. So it was, once I was able to classify like that, then I went into the 10 papers that were submitted to the journal, and then I say, this paper was looking at this particular technology, this type of IT users, these socio-political issues. And I wrote it in about 2 days. And I sent it to her, I said, yeah, I like it. So she gave me feedback, and I wrote it. And then if you look at the book, you see that she actually changed the title of the book and made it context-specific theorizing. Now, not to just say or to project myself, but one of the things that, or one of the reasons why we are here is to encourage you that it doesn't matter where you are from. So, I can call you. So, for instance, this is a B journal, so I don't really see my publication in that journal as something that is huge. I think of anytime I publish in A journal, that's what I really respect. However, I have got so many people sending me an email that, hey, we read your paper on this particular topic and we want to invite you to our editorial board. And I said, no, I'm really busy, I don't have the time. But this is where you leverage something that you have learned or you have used here. To conclude, initially my thinking was to look at other management disciplines like management, supply chain, finance. I have a little bit background in finance, and then apply this framework to those fields. And later on I said, no, I shouldn't do it. What I want to leave with you is that think about your discipline. If you are in supply chain, can you think, because think about what I said, in information system they have 3 contexts. The user, the usage, and the technology. If you were to go into management, that's not the same. That's not going to be the same. If you were to go into finance, that's not going to be the same. So now, if you are interested in doing any research, you can go and say, in that particular field, if I read 4 or 5 papers from that discipline, what do they see as the context? And then you can start thinking that if I want to do something in another theory that I want to expand, then those are some of the contexts that I can work with. So I will encourage you that in your own free time, you can talk among yourself and start thinking about stuff like that, and that can become a foundation when you start thinking about how you can expand on theory. I'm done. Anybody have any question?
Yeah, let me also say something. I mean, I think the whole idea is that ideas about research, ideas about extending theory is something that is right around the corner with us. But sometimes we want to go far away to get something to work on. Most of the things are really here with us. And I mean, even as he's talking, I'm also doing some work with another colleague of mine, and his area is supply chain, but he teaches also project management. My area is strategy, and he sees a lot of things that are happening in supply chain, especially in project management, and a lot of people want to find out what really determines project management success. You know that in Africa especially, there are so many projects going on, and most of the projects are failing. Not only and he talks about even the IT field. I mean, he's an IT person who tell you about. I mean, I mentioned the problem with SNIT. I mean, it's a project, and that project actually didn't succeed as they expected it. I mean, that's maybe the reason why there were cost overruns. That's why maybe it was expensive, and so he wanted to study the real causes of, not the causes, but the antecedents of project management success. And so he went to the literature and found out that a lot of people in the project management field, and also even in information technology, started talking about knowledge management. And so they said the knowledge acquisition among the project team members, or the knowledge sharing, or the knowledge exploitation, in other words, knowledge usage among project team members can influence your project management success. And so we sat down, we thought about it, and we said, well, I mean, think seriously about it. I said, if you go into the social capital literature, they also tell you that social capital influences knowledge management. Okay, but these people have not really talked about that. So what did we do? We said, well, we are going to include that in our theorizing and our contest, and say that it is very important to also consider the social capital among the project team members. Now, in the social capital area, you know, there are three types of social. They have the structural, they have the relational, and they have the cognitive. And a lot of work has been done on the structural. And because it is easy, structural is just the type of the relationship that people develop among themselves. And that has been studied a lot in the Western world, because it's easy for them to look at the structure of the relationship. Now, relational, yes, people have, and a lot of studies have been done on relational, looking at issues of trust. Trust has been the most popular way of looking at relational, you know. But there are few studies that really have looked at cognitive. Now, if you go to cognitive, it talks about norms and values. So we said, okay, let's look at in Africa. In most African countries, our cultural system is collectivistic in nature, which means that really we value relational issues. Yeah. But not only that, we also value norms and values. In fact, people will adhere to the norms of their culture. And if that is the case, then maybe norms that are set among project team members can play a very important role. And so we went in and said, we are going to not study the structural, but we know trust plays also a major role. So we're going to look at how social capital influences project management success, but in an indirect way. So my point is that we're going to take about the trust that is always developed among the project team members, and also the norms and values they set for themselves will allow them to share information very easily. If you trust your project team member, you share your knowledge with the person, you share information, you don't hold back. I mean, we also know that in our system here, people don't want to share a lot of information because they know when you take it away, you get promotion, they will be left behind. And so, but when there is that trust developed, you will be willing to share, and that person will also share with you. And it will help the project that all of you are part of managing. And so so you can see that we have taken it and we are saying that if you come to our environment, because of the cultural system, because of the fact that collectivism is very important. But of course, you know, Dr. Andoh Baidoo said about collectivism is not common to only Africa. The Chinese have a collectivistic culture. And so then you need to be able to frame it in a broader perspective and say that in societies where collectivism is predominant, because you are not going to, I'm not going to limit it to Ghana. Yes. Or because when I do that, somebody is going to come back and question me about other places. So I broaden it up. And when we broaden it up and say, we are going to test this using data from Ghana. So we've made it broad, but then we have to test it in a particular unique environment. And when it applies, then we will say that others should also try and test it in other places that have the same culture to see whether they are going to get the same results. And then that allows us to expand the theory behind what actually influences project management success. And can we now tap into the organization, say, look, when you have a project team, make sure you encourage them to develop that relationship, the trust, the value, so that they can use it as a way to improve upon the performance of the project as you move on. And so most of the time, I mean, there are things around us that are not, being used, and a lot of work has been done outside there where they do not have the type of socio-cultural environment that we have. I mean, our social and cultural environment is rich. It's rich, and it can be incorporated in everything that we do. You can see that the model he showed you, he was talking about collectivism, and that comes back to our own social cultural environment. And we say here, this is going to be more important. And that helps us to extend the theory and inform others that, look, we know that this theory may hold here, but if you come to our environment, you need to do something else. You need to add something to make sure that it works. So these are some of the things that we encourage you. I mean, as you sit down and you think, once you think about it, you try to start broadening your environment and saying, what do I need to do? Let me say something. When Jim was here and we watched the video and all the talks went around, one of the things that we said, and a lot of people were looking at, was the fact that this issue that we looked at can be looked at from so many dimensions. And that was really great. Could be looked at from so many dimensions. But at the same time, and that's why I said, look at what is happening around our own environment and ask ourselves, how can this help me develop a research question that I can answer? One of the issues that I've always asked people is that especially in Ghana, if you look at the issue of corporate governance, we have our statutory laws requires every parastatal to have a board. So every government organization must have a board. So the question is, what is the role of that board in making sure that those public organizations do well? And are they doing well? If they are not doing well, what is the problem? How do we fix it? We always look at corporate governance issues from the private perspective, but we've forgotten that it is even huge within the public sector. It's huge within the public sector, and I was very surprised. Honestly, I'm not on the right, I'm not on the left. I'm in the middle. If you do something right, I'll say it. If you don't do it right, I'll say it. And so I just want you guys to understand that, Baumia was my mate. But I'll say that. I'm not supporting anybody on the right or anybody on the left. But I cannot understand that they inaugurate a board of the Bank of Ghana. How many people are on the board? Can you tell me? About 17. Do you know the number of people of the board on Walmart? That is the largest organization in the world. Do you know the number of people on the board? 7. Now, the 17 people, what are they going to do? If you hold a meeting with 17 people, you will never arrive at a consensus. It will never happen. So are people put there for patronage purposes? Or are they put there to help our institutions improve upon their performance? And this is something some of you can take upon it. Let's do the research. Let's talk to some of these board members. And that is, and you do something similar to what Jim was saying. You have to be diplomatic. You are not going there to attack them. You are going there and to say that, look, we really appreciate what you guys are doing on the board. And I want to know this or that. You questions, and you come back. You get something that you can publish, and the press will be calling you and asking you about what can we do to change the way the board functions in the public sector. So there are so many things around us that we can easily tap into it and make it, a big issue for ourselves. Okay, you raise your hand up. Yeah. Yes.
So I would like to take you back to the point to make on using context to justify a choice of variable selection, also explaining why the variable is important. Like, I would like to talk about if that variable is really important in that context and it exists in that context. Usually one thing that you could observe is the differences in the scores that the cases will provide on it. Usually you don't have much variance in it. Recently, a friend of mine was studying religiosity and ethical behavior. And then he brought the data, I examined the relationship, and there was no relationship, it was 0. Yeah, so okay. I was trying to understand the data well. And I generated the mean scores, and I realized that all the respondents were taking the same score. They are all religious. to say. And it means that if they are all religious, you don't expect differences in ethical behavior to be resulting from differences in religiosity, because he was arguing that religiosity is an important concept in Africa. You know, we are very, very religious. And so he expects that because we are religious, we should be more ethical. And he collected the data and we didn't find any relationship, it was zero. So back to the context argument, if you use context to justify a variable like collectivism is a predominantly among Ghanaians, can we expect differences in the scores that your participant will provide on that particular construct or the scale you use?
Okay, let me answer that. So there is something about the level of analysis. So in this particular research, it was at the individual level. Generally, the Hofstede's model was developed for national level. So nobody asked me that, so now I'm going to answer. So there has been research, once again, those research have been published in top journals, where they have said that sometimes, see, I was born here, right? And so no matter what, I still have my Ghanaian tendency in me. Then I also live in the US for almost 21 years. So that means that I also have something in the US also in me. So I'm a balanced person. So if you take me and Ahmed, we are not exact same people, even though both of us have the Ghanaian tendency. Which means that if you were to look at my perspective about certain things, I'm different from him. So because of that, you can collect the data at the individual level. So in this particular case, I didn't look at it at the national level. Very, very important question. So sometimes if you want to go and do some work, you have to ask yourself and say, this particular theory, is it at the national level or at the individual level or at the organizational level? In certain situations, you might be able to apply it at multiple levels, but generally it's at one level. So you want to be able to understand that. The second issue, you yourself answered it because you found out that most of the respondents fit into one group. So there was no way you're going to find a difference. So that's why pilot study is very, very important. So you have to, first of all, or you have to define your population. So I don't know, let's say if you take something like in Ghana and you see that how do I say, you see that maybe 70% are Christian, let's say 30% are Muslims or 20, and then you have only 10%, then it means you already know that only 10%. So the justification is not there, right? So the only thing that Professor Akwai and I were talking about is that sometimes you can see that somebody is religious at the church, but they are not religious at home. So maybe something that will make more interesting work is if you can define those two places, right, and see what it is. I'll give you the third aspect. I think 2 days ago, Jim mentioned something about experimental, but he didn't go into detail. Because I'm an information system and I do some research in security, piracy, and privacy, sometimes when I ask you and I say, do you care about your privacy? You will say, yes. But if I watch your behavior tells me that you don't care. Let me give you an example. If you really, really care about your privacy, you will not log into free Wi-Fi. But most people will get to the airport and the airport says, hey, you can log into free Wi-Fi and it's not secured. And you are happy, pump, like that. So what you are saying is different from what you do. So in those kinds of areas, you can do an experiment. Which means if you do an experiment, the person will behave in the way they are. And it will be different from when you ask them a questionnaire, right? So sometimes those are the things that you can also use to learn something. So let's say you were to ask them something, right? Let's say somebody says, I'm not corrupt, right? And I think that's what Anna's issue comes in, because you are not corrupt, but your action shows that you are corrupt. Let me give you an example. If you ask anybody here, and I say, are you somebody that will pirate software? Maybe everybody will say no. But I can do an experiment and I'll give you, let's say, $500. And I'll say, use $500 to buy a software and use the software to perform certain action. And then I will open a web page. And then on the web page, I will show you a pirated software. And I'll say, this pirated software is 0. And then I can say, oh, the pirated software will do the same thing that the actual software will do. And most of the people will say, here's the money, put it in my pocket, buy the pirated software. So even though you ask you a question, you say you don't want to pirate, now when it was the actual action, you just pirate the software. So you can do experiment to do some of those things. So I think some of those type of issues you might be able to do it with an experiment rather than a survey. And also when the difference
I think that is very true. I was teaching a course, and I had a soft copy of the core test that we are using, and the student wanted the soft copy, and I thought that this is a copyright issue, so I don't want to give it to them. So, but all the students were appealing. Fortunately for me, there was a bishop in the class, and I said, let me get the opinion of the bishop. Should I give it to them? And the bishop said, you see, this is our environment. We don't have money, so give it to them. The bishop endorsed that I should give it to them, and I knew it was wrong to give it to them. So I said, okay, bishop, I'll give you the copy. Share it with them. And so I gave it to the bishop.
And he shared.
And he shared.
Okay, let me add one thing to it. People who study who are organizational behavior people, who study people in organizations, they have something they call desirability bias or something.
Yeah.
And that says that I always want to look good in your presence.
Yeah.
So even though I'm stealing, if you ask me whether I steal, I will say no.
No.
So they have a test. I think what you should have done was to get that scale and put it inside the questionnaire. And that would have told you whether these people are trying to answer the questions to really satisfy you, or they were being honest in the responses they were giving you. I mean, honestly, I agree with you that if you are religious, you have to have a high moral standard. But you guys couldn't see anything in that. And that shows that there may be some desirability issues, bias issues also in it. Yes.
Yeah, my issue relates to what Dominic spoke about. If his research approach, for instance, was qualitative, I know he might have used quantitative. Would the outcome be the same?
Let me answer. I don't know. It may have been different. It may also be the same. It depends on how the research design is structured. So it's the research design that will determine it. But actually, let me also say something to you. The results you obtained is a very interesting results. And I think if you can argue well, you will get it published somewhere. Very good. And you can make the argument that this is what should happen. If it didn't happen, then most people who tell you they are religious may not be religious at all. Maybe they get themselves involved in religious activities for social reasons, and not because they are interested in religious. That is why. I mean, you have a very, you got something that is counterintuitive, and you have a point, you can explain it, you will get it out there.
Okay, so
yeah, that's okay, that's fine. I think if you have time, you can do that.
There's two more.
just
Okay.
to what he is saying. So, for instance, let's say in literature, it's different. The results that have been found that there is no relationship with ethical behavior and religiosity. Now, can he use other instances where they found that such a relationship to at least explain and make that argument? Because it might be different from the argument that is in that particular field, which there is the hypothesis that has been established that religiosity equates or have a relationship with people's ethical behavior. So, we also know in Africa and most literature on religiosity, that's how it is. So, is he supposed to, can he introduce, I want the opinion, can he introduce a different, argument elsewhere to back that particular argument?
Yeah, I think I will go back to the one that talked about the qualitative. If you take a research method course, they will tell you when it is good to use qualitative, when it is good to use quantitative. And then I know that a lot of time people will do both. Then they will say, I did both qualitative and quantitative. And even when you are doing the MACE method, you have to know which one to use first. So for instance, if you are looking at something that have not been studied and the context is different, you want to be able to do the qualitative first, because it is based upon the qualitative that you can develop the instrument. And then use the instrument then to do the quantitative. Then you look at the collaboration. But if something that is already, then you can do the quantitative and use the qualitative to collaborate. Right. So that might be one thing to look at. Another thing is, I don't know what the data actually said. Right. Because once again, we don't know what you mean by religiosity and where was it measured at the first time, and then what are your psychometric variables, what are they saying?
Whether the person believes in God and all that. So it has to do with the person's faith in God, not necessarily the amount of attention the person pays towards religious activity. So I suggested that he use the other scale to also collect data and see if you get.
Recently, somebody presented a paper in my school, and I had never heard about this before. And he called something, maybe you are aware of it. He said something about confederate. And confederate. And I didn't understand, but it's very interesting. I mean, if you want to do a very interesting experimental research. And what he said, a confederate, is that what I was talking about, like, okay, I ask you to take the $500 and buy software, good software, and then you saw the pirated software, and you are confused whether you should buy the right software or you should buy the pirated software. So in the experiment, they will ask somebody, where's the class captain? And the class captain is somebody that's very powerful. So let's say the class captain or somebody that looks like the class captain, maybe they don't really know him, but you have heard about his name and you trust him. He may walk in here and say, oh, but everybody pirates. So he will make that statement, and if I'm the researcher, I will say, don't do that. See, I ask him to come and behave that way. So he will say, but everybody pirates. In Ghana, everybody pirates. And I say, don't do that. Don't disturb people. Right? And I would like to see whether his statement made a difference. Right? So I can have two groups where one of them will have the confederate, another group, they will not have that. Let me give you why I'm saying this. So when you ask people whether they are religious and they believe in God, it might be different than if, let's say, they go to a church where they have a pastor. If the pastor said it was good, just like he said, the bishop said, makes a whole lot, because even if the bishop is saying it's okay, well, how much more a mere person like me, right? So all those things are interesting things to do in research, to be able to do something new, right? Even the confederate that he's talking about, in our culture, it may look something different because of the power distance. Anytime anybody says something, anybody who is higher than you say something, you tend to believe them. Whereas in the US, people don't care what Donald Trump will say. So you see how here you will have more support for using stuff like that. So all those things are things that you have to look into. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, he had a question.
Yeah, so let me answer his question. And his question, you talked about, remind me again what you said. So that
is it in research ethically prudent to use other study in other fields to explain his study in a different field? For instance, the hypothesis
actually that is what we do all the time. You know that in the field of business, And note that I didn't say management, in business. All the theories we use are from the social sciences. All the theories we use, either from sociology, from psychology, criminology, or economics. So the social science theories are the theories we use in explaining the phenomena in business. And therefore, it will be instructive to even go into those literatures to see whether somebody has done something like that, and you can use it to support. I mean, you can go to the religious studies literature to see whether somebody has studied something like that to support your argument. And so, yes, it is allowed.
I think there was somebody.
Okay. Yes, Prof, I wanted to find out from my friend when he was trying to explore the relationship between religiosity and that of ethics, and he found almost no relationship. I was trying to find out if he explored further, because sometimes when you analyze the data and the relationship is zero, it could be that expectation of linear relationship might not be the case, but there may be a curvilinear relationship. So I wanted to find out if he tested that and...
Actually, that was the first thing that I did. I didn't find any relationship. So that was when I tried to understand the data. So when I realized that the variance is almost zero. So that I think the next step I did was to explore the curvilinear relationship. So I did that.
Yeah, so basically, like I said, one thing also you want to look at the instrument, because even when you talk about ethical behavior, where did you get your, because I know one of the PhD students that finished here like 3 years ago, he did something on ethical behavior, and it was difficult for him to find the dimension. So be careful about the instrument as a particular construct and to the measurement model and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think looking at the discussion, I realized I could just share on one or two things. Just prior to joining KNUST, I was in Malaysia for the past 15 years where I was teaching, and I think that's my area. So I just wanted to share, we relate to that one. I did the research on piety and how it will influence citizenship behavior. And in our research, we came out to see piety to have two dimensions, which is spirituality and social responsibility. And spirituality is all about your relationship with God. That's the basic definition. And then social responsibility is all about your relationship to man, your relationship to animals, even to other nature generally. So what happened was that when we come to the spirituality to do some kind of data collection, the issue we're raising here, the social desirability bias, or what we call the SDB, is quite prevalent. So what we do is, to bypass it, we have to use a third-person report. So instead of asking you yourself, I will ask you a friend about yourself, who knows you better. Or if I want to ask you about your supervisor, I'd rather ask you about your supervisor and ask your supervisor about you, and then also ask you directly, so we sum up the mean. Yeah. And then we get, that may not take out completely the desirability bias, but it will minimize it. So that's just an attempt. One of the things we do. Another one is the what we call average person hypothesis in the organizational behavior area. So, I mean, looking at his findings, so far I think I stepped outside, I couldn't really get the actual, but looking at the findings, in our findings, is there something similar that shows that spirituality does not necessarily statistically influence citizenship behavior, but we really found that people who have social responsibility, in other words, taking care of mankind and other nature, they tend to have good citizenship behavior in the organizations. So, and again, looking at the context, we looked at it in Malaysia, just like you said in Ghana. Ghana is the direct opposite of Malaysia in terms of the religions. We have the majority to be Muslims, about 60%. You have the Buddhists, and you also have the Hindus and the Christians. So we looked at the data. We use, in the data collection, we use disproportionate stratified random sampling, looking at the differences in the, in the percentages of the religions. And we concentrated much in this particular research on the Muslims being the majority and looking at the direction of the research grant at that time. So, I mean, in just support of what he just said, we could do another research to further look at, let's say, if you have used disproportionate stratified random sampling to look at other data from different religions so that you can have triangulation?
I believe that we are trying to force a resource. What he got, I don't see anything wrong with it. Religiosity does not influence ethical behavior. Otherwise, you will not go to a church and there will be announcement that don't leave your phone. Make sure you hold your phone and your bag. So the resource is a genuine resource. You might find a way of explaining it. I don't think we should force it to make sure that religiosity can influence ethical behavior. It doesn't.
But Doc, I think if you allow me, I would like to...
Can I say something? So,
yes.
It means you can actually change the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can actually say, how can religiosity influence ethical behavior?
Or does religiosity influence ethical behavior?
Because then when you say how, then you are looking for mediation.
Yes.
What are the things that have to be done for it to work? Because when I came, I talked about the green supply and all those things, like he said. Maybe somebody will come to church and he will make sure he doesn't do anything wrong in the church. But as soon as he gets out, he takes this thing and throws it away. And that's what you found, because their environmental concerns are minimal. All they want to do is to satisfy God and satisfy the pastor. But like you said, they might even take your phone, right? So I think those are some of the interesting things that we have to look at.
I think I wanted to react to what Dr. Ahmed said just now with regard to the whether we are forcing something to be there when it is not supposed to be there. But what I can see is, having done some small research on ethics, is that we normally differentiate between morality and ethics.
Yeah.
And when we come to ethics, we have different types of ethics. But morality is basically what and how you learn to know what is right from what is wrong, what is good from what is bad, or good and evil. And this we cultivate it even from home. Since you are a child, the parents will start to give you morality. So ethics is the application of the morality. So if you know the morality based on where you come from, and based on context, based on your perspective, and then you don't really apply what you learn based on where you come from. This is where we say you're unethical. But ethics cannot be universal, but morality can be universal based on how we learn things. But when we come to ethics, there is differences in terms of, like I said, the application as to whether we are religious based on Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, or anything. We can have differences. And we can also have differences based on political arena. We can have differences based on the country, because there are some countries that will legalize prostitution. In Ghana, we see them as being immoral or being unethical, where they see as being unethical for throwing things on the floor. You get the point. So the idea here is that there are some people who think in order for you, based on, looking at the theories of ethics, they will start with the conventional aspects, and then we also have the religious ethics. So when we come to religious ethics and conventional ethics, these are two parallel things that move together. Now the challenge we are having here is that we are trying to merge between religious ethics with conventional ethics, and that's a challenge. And for that one, it depends on how you put your research questions. You can get something the same that you expect or something different.
So Ahmed, put me on the picture. Prof. Yes.
Prof, just to add something little, I also think that we can also be looking at the level of religiosity, because instances we can look at the lower level of religiosity, you may not see them engage in ethical behavior. And probably sometimes as it rises, you may see some relationship. Then the second issue has to do with the possibility of us leaving out some very important variable to connect it. Because religiosity, ethical behavior. Why is a person religious but unethical? And then the example we gave, for instance, about the software.
Yeah.
So what is forcing or compelling that person to now go for a pirated software instead of the original?
Yeah.
So
one of the things that I would say is that we don't know what you guys have studied up till this time. But one of the interesting things about research is there is something called instrument development. And you have to have a rigorous way of developing the instrument. And so sometimes your main contribution is just to define the construct well and to collect the data and to measure it well. So I think if someone is interested in that, maybe the person can pursue it, and sometimes it takes 2-3 years just to develop an instrument. So that would be one of the things. And I also wanted to say that don't let us think that because we talked about this Wells Fargo problem, everybody here has to focus on that problem. Because personally, what I think is really, really important is, can we get a lot of scholars that can do different things? I remember James said 2 things that I want to remind us. One of them was he was looking for the finance people. And I was also looking for the finance people because there are a lot of finance issue here. But I didn't see anybody coming with issue with finance, because my PhD dissertation was on event study. Anytime there is an event, it can have an effect on the stock market, which is the abnormal return. So that's what I was looking at. So, and you could see that they were showing in the video the stock price coming down and coming down and coming down. So those are things that finance people can study. And so what is going to happen is, like we said earlier, that if there is an issue, and I'll go back to the SNIT problem. I personally, after my master's, I work as an IT person, and I work on ERP, SAP in particular implementation. And SAP implementation, we are dealing with millions of dollars. And like I told you, one time in Europe, they spent $1.2 billion. No, 1.2 billion euro. And then it just went waste. So as a professor, even though I don't support corruption, when I look at the case that happened, my interest was not just on the corruption. And the reason is because most people, see, when you are a professor or you are a scholar, you have to focus on the fact. You have to be biased towards your area. So it's okay if, let's say, like he said, you are NDC, MPP, to think about what happened. But it is more important for you to focus on your research. And so you look at the amount of money involved, and people said, oh, how can they spend $76 million? And people were saying if they were to go to the internet, they can buy the software. And I started asking them, what is the software? You don't even know the software, but you know that the software is expensive. How did you know that? You don't know how much ERP software cost.
Yeah.
But most of us are educated, and we started saying, oh, they corrupt, they did. So you have to go with that mentality that what was the software? How much does it typically cost to implement those software? And then you might see that, oh, typically it costs maybe 2 million, and they are talking about 76 million. Then you can start thinking that there are some issues with corruption. But let's say that you are an expert, and you know that ERP software will cost maybe 100 million, then 76 million is not an issue. Yes. So that's why, for me, it was interesting for me as a professor to know that the guy didn't have the qualification. Because then I realized that if he doesn't have a qualification, then that is one of the issues, a management issue, that the hiring process, how did the guy get there in the first place? So those become important issues. And then you can then start thinking of a research that you want to pursue. Because for me, what I think will be interesting research for that particular case is to be able to see the forces or the factors that led to the failure. And I think that's what Prof was saying, that in the supply chain, you come in and say, why is it that IT projects are failing? So people have talked about various factors that influence those failures.
Yeah.
But maybe they don't have anything that says that the people that were there were not qualified. So this might be a very good example where the qualification of the people involved become the big issue. And then you start thinking and then start saying that, oh, this is something that you can do something about. And I think those things will help. So and then Jim also said, we outside Ghana, we look at Ghana and Africa as corrupt people. So we should not also make it like this is our reinforce. Yeah. This is our topic. Everybody is corrupt. Everybody is corrupt. Because a PhD student did the work on Ghana, and one of the construct was this ethical behavior, and the ethical behavior was high. And not only that, we noticed that anytime they have an ERP, it also helps them to become less, right? So you don't want to say that I'm hiding anything, but don't go with that intention also to say that, oh, because you are corrupt, I'm going to see, by all means, I'm going to see corruption, right? So let's think about many topics that we can do, and not just corruption. Maybe one or two people will focus on the corruption, and they will develop good instrument, and the rest of us, they are so, for instance, right now, I see here that they are talking about mobile money. They are talking about how there is something called interoperability or something like that. Some of these things are new, and a lot of people outside Ghana want to hear that. They talk about cashless society and all kinds of things that are new, right? And we need to get involved. There is a particular issue about analytics, right? And even as Prof was talking about the social capital, there is a website called IdeaStorm. IdeaStorm allows Dell customers and users to give Dell ideas on how to improve their services and how to improve the products. And if you go and look at the data that they have, the data you can identify cognitive capital, you can identify relational capital, but you can't identify social capital. So you see, and I'm working with a PhD student. He came from GIMPA. He's a student that came from GIMPA, and I'm working with him on the topic. And you can see that we are making this argument that in this environment, in this context, we don't have social capital. And then we will make an argument that they should look into social capital. So there's a lot of research in different disciplines for all kinds of management research or business system that we have to pursue. So that's one thing I want to encourage you.
I think from yesterday and today, what we have all listened, there are a number of students who have come to me and say, oh, can you give me PhD research topic? You now understand that you don't just give a topic that there is a topic, go and do it. You can pick even from your dining table. So it's all about opening up your mind and be thinking about issues around us. You can pick a topic from your church, from your own workplace, from your home, everywhere. So you have to develop interest. You must have the motivation to work on a particular issue. So it's not just like if you listed number of topics, so you take this, you take, no. If you do that, you will find it difficult to pursue it. You must understand what you want to do, and you read around it before you begin. So that is a little advice.
Please, when you were talking, you said in the computer science research regarding computers or the computer science, you are interested in three contexts. That is the user, technology, and then you said something else which I can't remember. Usage. I want to find out what is the context when it has to do with management and issues about organizations.
Yeah, so when I started first, I was saying that in research, your dependent variable is the most important thing before the antecedent. So in information system is different from computer science. The concept of information system is that you are helping the organization to adopt a technology and to use the technology support something. So if they don't use the technology, that means that all the implementation was useless. So let's take a bank, and let's say the bank will implement an ERP system. Let's say it's $4 million, or let's say $100 million. They don't use it. That is gone. So use became an important dependent variable. Then people will start looking at what are the factors that will influence use, and then you can then say, how does use influence performance? How does use influence something? But your original goal was to use. Almost everybody in this room now has an iPhone or any other phone, and then you have a lot of apps. Apps are applications. They are applications you are not using on your desktop, but you are using on your mobile device. If you don't use them, they are useless. So use is something that is going to be important forever, because every IT IS is supposed to be used. So that's why use, and then use will relate to other stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but no. I wanted to find out, what about in the with regard to management and organizations? You said the context for IT is what you've told us. What about management and organizations?
So
what is the context?
So what we are saying is that whenever somebody is going to publish IS-based research, they want to see some IT in it, and they have something called IT artifact. So if I write a research and I don't talk about any technology in it, it's not information system paper. And they're going to say, were you talking about particular people? For instance, I just talked about ideas. So now I'm talking about a particular user. I'm not talking about people that will do face-to-face, but I'm talking about people that meet on a social media platform. So you might have additional context. Like, for instance, you may say, I'm looking at maybe SME. So SME will be additional context in terms of types of organization. Or you might be interested in maybe a multinational organization. But at the minimum, IS papers want to see the IT user, what usage you are focused on, and what type of technology you are dealing with. And then you can have other contests in it. But those are the three important contests that you want to look at. And I think what I was suggesting, that was a very good question. I was suggesting is that when I move from IT for development, the focus completely switches from use to development. So let me give you an example. So if I'm going to study mobile money, right, I can think of the usage of mobile money. But if I want to look at the vendor, somebody that is a mobile money vendor, then the good thing is that right now there is unemployment here in Ghana. But I know they have, maybe I don't know how many kiosks we have that people operate mobile money. That is a business. That is a small organization, maybe one person or two people. So is this job helping them to develop? Are they able to take care of their family? Are they able to improve their socio-economic status? So it means the focus now switches to development. And that's why I said in that environment, I have to extend the context. So the IT use and usage and things are important, but they are not as important as the socio-economic variables that I want to study. And so if I move from IT for development and I move into supply chain, I can go ahead and define new context. If I move into finance, I can define, let me give you another example with finance. Like we talk about event study. And you see that what he was showing us was more or less about a bank, a financial institution, and you can do event study. When I did mine, I moved the context into information security. And I was looking at when people make announcement that they have been breached. So I'm moving into a new context. Right, and so, and also they were looking at different things I'm looking at. So you can define the context in different disciplines. And that is the goal of my presentation, to give you an idea that as you look into different, let's say human resource, then you can define your own context, and then you can use the context to modify existing theory, and you can make a contribution in that context. I think, any more questions? Okay, so thank you so much, and you want to say something?
already tired. We have our last session, but looking at the faces, we don't want to start. So we're going to close for today, and we'll continue tomorrow. So I wish you were. Sorry. Tomorrow we're going to start at the same time, 9 o'clock. Please don't be late. And then we'll close at 3 o'clock. Right. Sorry. Yes, tomorrow is the last session. But the DBA students, you have lectures on Saturday and Sunday. So you have a long way to go. For the PhD students, I think you can have a break after tomorrow's session. All right. Thank you.
You have to cross-check your bags and see if there's no snake. Oh. Check your bag, see if there's no snake. Check your bag, see if you are not carrying snakes away. Snake.